My spoiled sister kissed my BF days before her wedding. Then karma struck. As a 28-year-old woman, I found myself in a challenging situation involving my 25-year-old sister Sharon and my 28-year-old boyfriend Jake. My sister's wedding was fast approaching, and I began to notice that her behavior around my boyfriend was becoming increasingly peculiar. Initially, it wasn't anything overt, just small, subtle actions that left me feeling uneasy. It began with seemingly innocent comments, where my sister would often say things like, "Wow, you're so funny," in response to my boyfriend's jokes, even when they were not particularly amusing. She laughed a bit too enthusiastically at everything he said. At first, I tried to dismiss it, thinking that perhaps she was just being overly friendly due to the excitement surrounding the upcoming wedding. However, as time passed, I began to notice more troubling signs. She started to find excuses to touch him casually, like placing a hand on his arm during a conversation or lightly bumping into him as she walked past. These gestures were subtle yet unmistakable. I also observed her eyes lingering on him a bit too long when he wasn't looking, which made my shaky churn with discomfort. One evening, after we returned home from a family dinner where my sister had been particularly flirtatious, I decided to talk to my boyfriend about it. I turned to him and asked, "Did you notice how Sharon was behaving tonight?" He looked at me with confusion and replied, "What do you mean?" I then explained the behaviors I had observed. The excessive laughing, the unnecessary touching, and the lingering glances. He listened, but after a moment he simply shrugged and said, "I think you're overthinking it. She's probably just excited about the wedding. It's harmless." Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The situation didn't feel harmless to me at all. So, I decided to keep a closer eye on things, hoping that I was just overreacting and that my suspicions were unfounded. The next few weeks were tense. Every time we were around my sister, I found myself constantly watching her, noticing every little thing she did. It became clear that she was always trying to position herself near my boyfriend. She would often sit next to him whenever she could and seemed to find endless excuses to ask for his help with wedding-related tasks, even when I was standing right there. One day, we were all at my parents' house for a family barbecue. At one point, I went inside to use the bathroom, and when I returned, I saw something that made my heart sink. My sister and my boyfriend were talking quietly in a corner of the yard, standing unusually close to one another. My sister was giggling at something he said, a sound that made my shake each churn with unease. The moment they noticed me, they quickly stepped apart, and my sister walked away as if nothing had happened. I felt a wave of nausea and anger but decided not to confront them on the spot, not wanting to create a scene at a family gathering. Instead, I waited until we got home that night. When we were alone, I tried to approach the topic as calmly as I could. I asked my boyfriend, "What were you and Sharon talking about earlier?" He seemed surprised by my question and explained, "We were just talking about some wedding details, like the music selection." His response didn't satisfy me. I couldn't help but question why such a simple conversation required them to stand so close together. He sighed, clearly frustrated, and tried to dismiss my concerns. He assured me once again that there was nothing going on, insisting that my sister was just being friendly. By this point, I couldn't hold back my feelings any longer. I expressed my frustration, pointing out that my sister was practically throwing herself at him, and that he wasn't doing anything to stop it. My words seemed to hurt him, and he looked at me with a pained expression, asking, "What exactly do you expect me to do? She's your sister." He reminded me that she was family, and he was simply trying to be polite. Telling her to back off seemed out of the question to him. I told him that he could at least set some boundaries, making it clear that he wasn't interested in anything more than a friendly relationship. But he insisted that he wasn't interested in her at all, claiming there was nothing to clarify because I was seeing problems that didn't exist. Our conversation went in circles, with neither of us willing to see the other's point of view, leaving us both frustrated and unsure of what to do next. After arguing for a while without any resolution, it became clear that our conversation was going nowhere. My boyfriend kept insisting that I was just imagining things, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him to see what was so painfully obvious to me. In the end, we both went to bed feeling angry and frustrated, with the issue still unresolved. The following day, I realized that I needed to confront my sister directly. It was clear that avoiding the issue was only making things worse. So, I decided to call her and ask if we could meet up for coffee. She readily agreed, her voice cheerful and seemingly unaware of my growing concerns. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near her apartment. When we met, I was nervous, my hands trembling slightly as I stirred my coffee. My sister, on the other hand, was in high spirits, chatting enthusiastically about her wedding plans. She seemed completely oblivious to my discomfort, which only made the situation more difficult for me. After a few minutes of listening to her talk, I realized I couldn't hold it in any longer. I interrupted her mid-sentence, my voice betraying the seriousness of what I was about to say. "I need to talk to you about something important," I said, my tone serious. My sister, caught off guard by the sudden shift, looked at me with surprise and asked, "What's wrong?" Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I began to explain. I told her that I had noticed how she had been behaving around Jake, my boyfriend, and that it was making me uncomfortable. I mentioned the flirting, the casual touches, and the lingering looks, things that had been bothering me for some time. I emphasized that her behavior needed to stop. As I spoke, I watched her face transform through a range of emotions. At first, there was surprise, then confusion, and finally anger. She demanded to know what I was talking about, vehemently denying that she had been flirting with Jake at all. I refused to back down, insisting that she had been doing exactly that, whether she realized it or not. Her response was a laugh, though it was far from genuine. "You're being ridiculous," she said dismissively. "Jake's practically family. I'm just being friendly." Her words did little to ease the tension between us. I could tell that this conversation had struck a nerve. As I sat there, it became clear that this was not going to be an easy issue to resolve, and the rift between us was likely only going to deepen. "I'm not making this up," I said firmly. "You're constantly finding excuses to be near him, touching him, laughing at everything he says. It's not just friendliness, Sharon. You're crossing a line." Her face turned red with anger. "So now I'm the bad guy?" she snapped. "You must be really insecure to accuse me of something like this." Her words stung, but I stood my ground. "This isn't about insecurity," I said. "This is about respect. You need to stop this now, Sharon. It's not okay." Suddenly, she stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, signaling the end of our conversation. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to your paranoid accusations," she declared. "If you can't trust your own sister, that's your problem, not mine." With that, she stormed out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there, alone and overwhelmed with emotions. I felt awful. I began to question myself. Had I overreacted? Was I really just being paranoid? When I returned home, my boyfriend immediately noticed that something was wrong. He asked me what had happened, and I recounted the conversation I had just had with Sharon. As I shared the details, I could see the concern growing on his face. When I finished, he let out a heavy sigh. "I think you might have made a big mistake," he said cautiously. His words stung. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feeling defensive. "Are you taking her side?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I'm not taking her side. But Sharon is probably really hurt right now, especially with her wedding coming up. Maybe you didn't need to confront her so directly. So what was I supposed to do? Just ignore it?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. The hurt and anger I had been holding in were bubbling to the surface. My boyfriend sighed again, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I just think there might have been a better way to handle it. Maybe we could have talked about it together first. Figured out how to approach her in a way that wouldn't make things worse." "Make things worse for who? Her?" I snapped. "What about me? Do you know how humiliating this feels? To watch my own sister act like that around you, and you just stand there letting it happen?" His expression softened, and he reached out to put his hands on my shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said. "I really am. I don't want you to feel like I'm not on your side. I didn't know it was bothering you this much. It shouldn't have to get to this point," I said quietly, tears welling up in my eyes. "You should have set boundaries with her. You should have made it clear that her behavior wasn't okay." "I didn't think it was a big deal," he admitted. "I thought she was just being friendly. But if it's making you this upset, I'll try to be more mindful going forward." I wanted to believe him, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he was still trying to downplay what had happened. Our conversation ended without any real resolution, leaving me feeling more conflicted than ever. In the following days, the tension only grew. My sister had completely stopped speaking to me, and the awkwardness between me and my boyfriend lingered like a dark cloud over our relationship. Then, a week before Sharon's wedding, everything came to a head. I went to my parents' house to try to smooth things over. I hoped that if I could explain my side of the story, they might understand why I had confronted Sharon and help mediate the situation. When I arrived, I heard voices coming from the side of the house. Curious, I walked around to the backyard. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Sharon and Jake, my boyfriend, were standing close together, partially hidden behind a large plant. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, and his hands were on her waist. Before I could fully process what was happening, Sharon leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a deep, passionate kiss that left no room for misinterpretation. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I couldn't move or speak. But as the shock gave way to a surge of anger, I found my voice. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. Both Sharon and Jake jumped apart, their faces pale with guilt. Sharon's eyes widened in shock, while Jake stammered, "It's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. There was no denying it now. "You two deserve each other," I spat, tears streaming down my face. "You're disgusting." Sharon tried to say something, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "I don't want to hear it." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, ignoring their desperate calls for me to come back. I got into my car and drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got home, I could barely think. My emotions were a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I grabbed my phone and blocked both Sharon and Jake's numbers. I wanted nothing to do with either of them. That night, I packed a suitcase with enough clothes and essentials to last a week. I didn't want to stay in my apartment, surrounded by memories of a relationship that had been shattered. I booked a room at a nearby hotel and left without telling anyone where I was going. The silence of the hotel room offered some relief, but it also left me alone with my thoughts. The image of Sharon and Jake kissing replayed in my mind like a broken record, each replay more painful than the last. I couldn't understand how they could do this to me. How could my sister betray me like this? How could Jake? Over the next few days, my phone was flooded with calls and messages. My parents, Jake, and even mutual friends tried to reach me, but I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to face anyone. Then, I realized there was one person who deserved to know the truth. Charles, Sharon's fiancé. I hesitated for hours before dialing Charles's number. What would I say? How would he react? But I knew I couldn't let him walk into a marriage with someone who had betrayed him so deeply. When Charles answered, his voice was calm but confused. "Hey, this is unexpected," he said. "Is everything okay?" "Charles," I began, my voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you. It's about Sharon." There was a pause. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone now laced with concern. Taking a deep breath, I told him everything. I explained how I'd noticed Sharon's inappropriate behavior around Jake, how I'd confronted her about it, and how everyone, including Jake, had dismissed my concerns. Then, I told him about what I'd seen in my parents' garden. Charles was silent as I spoke. When I finished, there was a long pause before he finally said, "I don't even know what to say." "I'm so sorry, Charles," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but you needed to know." "Thank you," he said quietly. "I appreciate your honesty. I need some time to think." We ended the call, and I felt a small sense of relief knowing that Charles now knew the truth. What he chose to do with that information was up to him. On the day of the wedding, I stayed at the hotel, trying to distract myself with movies and snacks. I couldn't bring myself to face my family or anyone else. Then, in the late afternoon, my cousin Brenda called me. "You are not going to believe what just happened," she said, her voice hushed but urgent. "What?" I asked, sitting up straight. "The wedding, it didn't happen," she said. "Charles called it off." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" Brenda explained that everything had seemed normal at first. Sharon had walked down the aisle in her beautiful dress, and Charles had been standing at the altar, waiting for her. But when it came time for the vows, Charles stepped forward and addressed the guests. He told everyone that he couldn't go through with the wedding, not after learning about Sharon's betrayal. He didn't hold back. He revealed everything about Sharon's affair with Jake, even mentioning that I had been the one to tell him the truth. Sharon was left standing at the altar in tears while the guests whispered in shock. "Your parents were furious," Brenda said. "They tried to calm everyone down, but it was chaos." Charles just walked out of the church. It was wild. I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt vindicated, but another part of me was heartbroken for everyone involved. The day after the canceled wedding, my phone was flooded with messages from family members. My parents left multiple voicemails, demanding to know what I had done. Sharon had apparently told them that I was the one who ruined her wedding, painting herself as the victim. I didn't respond to any of the calls or texts. I was emotionally drained and couldn't handle their accusations. By the evening, my cousin Brenda stopped by the hotel. She brought food and insisted on talking. She filled in the gaps about what happened after Charles walked out. According to Brenda, the wedding guests were left in stunned silence, unsure whether to stay or leave. Sharon collapsed into tears at the altar while my parents tried to comfort her. Eventually, the officiant dismissed the crowd, and most people awkwardly shuffled out of the church. Sharon hadn't been able to explain herself to anyone. She was too distraught. Charles, on the other hand, was calm and composed as he left the venue. He didn't make a scene. He simply told a few close friends and family members that the wedding was off, and that he needed time to process everything. Brenda mentioned that several people sided with Charles, saying he'd made the right decision after learning the truth. "I think most people know now," Brenda said softly. "Sharon's reputation is in shambles, and your parents are trying to do damage control. But honestly, they're furious with you." I sighed, expecting as much. "I didn't want to ruin her wedding, Brenda. I just couldn't let Charles marry her without knowing the truth." "I know," Brenda said, squeezing my hand. "And so does Charles. You did the right thing." A few days later, I finally returned to my apartment. Almost immediately, my parents showed up. My mother looked furious, while my father was uncharacteristically quiet. How could you? My mother hissed as she walked through the door. Your sister's life is ruined because of you. I crossed my arms, trying to stay calm. Sharon ruined her own life. She had an affair with my boyfriend, Mom. What was I supposed to do? Pretend it didn't happen? You didn't have to tell Charles, she snapped. You humiliated her in front of everyone. She humiliated herself, I shot back. And she betrayed me. She's the one who should be apologizing, not me. My father finally spoke, his tone measured but stern. We're not saying Sharon was right, but family is supposed to stick together. You could have handled this privately. Privately? Like how you all ignored me when I tried to talk about her behavior weeks ago. I said, my voice rising. None of you listened. You all made me feel like I was crazy. I was the only one who cared enough to tell Charles the truth. My mother shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. We're your family. You've torn us apart. Couldn't hold back anymore. No, Mom. Sharon did that the moment she decided to kiss my boyfriend. She's the one who destroyed our family, not me. The room fell silent. My parents exchanged a look, and I could see the weight of my words settling over them. My mother started to say something but stopped, seemingly at a loss for how to respond. I didn't hear from Sharon directly for weeks after the wedding. Then one day, she showed up at my door. Her eyes were puffy, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Can we talk? She asked quietly. I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat on the couch, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag. I don't even know where to start, she said, her voice breaking. I messed up. I know I messed up. I stayed silent, letting her continue. I don't know why I did it, she said, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't thinking. I was stressed about the wedding and Jake. He was just there. I never meant for it to go this far. You didn't mean for it to go this far? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You kissed my boyfriend, Sharon. You let it go far enough to destroy my relationship and your own wedding. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Her apology felt hollow. I could see the regret on her face, but I wasn't sure if it was regret for her actions or for the consequences. I appreciate the apology, I said finally, my tone cold. But I can't forgive you right now. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed my trust, and that's not something I can easily move past. Sharon nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. I hope one day we can fix this. She left shortly after, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I wasn't sure if our relationship would ever recover, but at least the door for reconciliation was cracked open, if I ever chose to walk through it. Sharon finally apologized, admitting she had made a mistake and expressing regret for her actions. While her apology felt sincere, it also seemed driven by the consequences she faced, including the canceled wedding and strained family relationships. I appreciated her words but made it clear that forgiveness would take time and effort. My parents struggled to come to terms with the situation. They initially blamed me for the wedding fallout but began to realize the depth of Sharon's betrayal. However, their loyalty to Sharon remained strong, and their attempts to reconcile the family often felt one-sided, focused on me moving on rather than holding Sharon accountable. Charles cut off all ties with Sharon and has since moved on with his life. I haven't heard from him directly since our initial conversation, but mutual acquaintances say he's focusing on his career and personal growth. He remains a symbol of integrity in this messy situation. I started therapy to help process the betrayal and rebuild my self-esteem. My sessions have been invaluable in helping me set boundaries with my family and work through my emotions. I've also leaned on close friends and relatives like Brenda, whose support has been unwavering. While Sharon's apology opened the door for future reconciliation, I've decided to keep my distance for now. Rebuilding our relationship would require genuine effort and time on her part, and I'm not ready to let her back into my life fully. This ordeal taught me the importance of trusting my instincts and standing up for myself. Despite being gaslighted initially, I proved that my suspicions were valid. I've grown stronger and more resilient, determined to protect my peace and prioritize my happiness moving forward. I'm still navigating the aftermath of this betrayal, but I feel like I'm on the right path. While trust is difficult to rebuild, I found comfort in focusing on my own well-being and surrounding myself with people who truly support me. Whether or not I fully reconcile with Sharon remains uncertain, but for now, I'm prioritizing my healing and future.